thank you very, very much, everybody, for joining us. We have lots of things that we're excited to be announcing. This is our first meeting of the year, so thank you very, very much for joining. We took 2 weeks off and I missed most of you. I saw a few of you a few times over the break with meetings, but yeah, I definitely missed having these and connecting, so I'm excited to be back. Kayla, do you have anything that you want to add or anything you want to share? I'm really excited about, for those of you that don't know, both Kayla and Joanne are part of our team. Joanne is over our member relations and Kayla is Kayla, do you want to make an announcement?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I've recently come on as the COO of GHA. So I'm really excited to help grow and expand. And I've been hanging out for a while. Pretty much everybody here looks familiar. Doing some background work for a few months, and we were like, let's make this official. So happy to be here as the COO, very excited. And anything anybody needs, I'll drop my email in the chat. Happy to jump in and start getting this knocked out with you guys.
Cool. So thank you very, very much. So with that being said, hi, Eric. It's good to see you also. Happy New Year. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Mandi.
Hello.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, by the way, thanks for sending that Victory for Hemp video. That was fun. Just
yeah, circulate it.
Absolutely. I actually posted it and sent it to some of my team and they were just in awe. It's funny. I've seen it. I've watched it a couple of times, but if any of you have not seen it, the Victory for Hemp video, it's right before the war, promoting and just the info about how to grow. It was, good reminder. It was fun. Anyways, thank you guys very, very much. For those of you that are new to Global Hemp Association, we're a membership-based organization. Your support helps us a ton. I want to give a huge thank you to those of you that are our members. We have lots of resources available. For those of you that have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Joanne or Kayla as well. Kayla's more on the operations side. We have a few big groups or committees that are really starting to take hold. Our farming and our education group, as well as a finance or funding group to help support what that looks like for our organization. And then we have a research division that's getting ready, and we'll start putting together a committee for that pretty soon. But we will be launching seed trials. And on our seed trials this year, I encourage your guys' involvement. They're national seed trials, very research focused. We'll be publishing some information here pretty soon and sending it out, but we would love your support. So if you guys have questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out. I know that we'll talk a little bit about it. James is doing something similar in his area. So it's obviously something that's, for those of you that know, especially the processors and farmers that are looking to, for real data to what to grow, where, when, how, so forth. So with that being said, James, well, before I start, does anybody have any questions or anything that they'd like to address real quick before we get started? If you do, don't hesitate to raise your hand. You can use the icon down at the bottom of the screen, or you can feel free to put it in the chat. I'm happy to address questions. If you aren't familiar with Zoom, you can change the view of your Zoom in your upper right-hand corner. You can change to, so you have all the little screens, or so that the speaker is a big screen on your a big box, I guess, on your screen. You can also hold on to the little screens and drag them around. So those with cameras on or those that are speaking, you can actually drag up to the top. And then, like I said, when you are on camera or on your mic, be respectful of time. We're here really to speak or talk to what James is doing versus what everybody else is doing. Use this time, please, to connect and take advantage of being able to connect with each other. But while we are on the mic, I just want to be respectful of our hour and our topics. So without further ado, if nobody else has anything else they want to add real quick, James, I'd love to turn it over to you and get an intro from you and hear what you're working on, and then we'll dive into some topics and questions.
Thank you. Look, especially, I'd first like to say it's an honor to be invited to address this group. I recognize quite a few of the people on here. And I think that the whole issue of carbon is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger in the next few years. And it's obviously something we need to address for the benefit of the planet, really. Because I think there's very few of us that can get off this planet, probably 3 or 4 people can get off this planet and move to Mars. And the rest of us are stuck here. So I've always been somebody involved and very mindful of the environment. I used to surf as a kid in England, believe it or not. They get big surf there. And I was always getting ear infections and things like that. And then I realized that I was getting those ear infections because of pollution. And it actually stimulated me to become involved in the environment, which stimulated me then to go and study it for my degree, environmental management, and then followed it up in my career, really. Like many people, I've been involved in, I've actually worked in marketing, and I've worked with many of the big bad guys like Shell and Ford, etc. But what I find with hemp is I'm able to bring back my beliefs with something that can actually help people to develop an industry and make a living. And I think if we can do that, that's actually a good thing. So I became involved in hemp in 2009 from the point of view of working on carbon sequestration. And then since then, I've become more involved in other things like medicinal cannabis, food, fiber, herd, all the other things that hemp can do, the myriad of things that hemp can do, which we all know about. So I think we're in a good place right now where hemp can actually play a major role in helping with environmental concerns, and also with something that
drinks.
Sorry,
I gotcha.
Okay, right. Also with something that can actually help people, fiscally as well, because there's nothing wrong with earning a living from something which is doing good for the planet too. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. How I arrived here was I've been doing some speeches recently on carbon, and some people here have heard me, and then people have got in touch with other people, and then Mandi has been in touch with me and then asked me to come today to speak about hemp and carbon. So that's how I got here. And I'm on this beach, as you can see, in Sydney. You'll forgive me because this is our holiday season here. It's our summer holidays. So we tend to spend that on the beach.
Oh, that's where I wish I was. I'm on my beach in the back here.
Yeah, I've been on that same beach a number of times.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you know this beach. This is a good beach. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so talk about some of your findings. I guess part of the maybe some of the platforms that are available for carbon trade specifically.
Okay. Look, there's several ways that somebody can approach this market. There are platforms which are controlled, which relate to a certain country's commitments, and those are what people normally call carbon credits. Then there are other platforms which are voluntary, which mean that you go to, you devise your own methodology, and you go to speak to a company or a country and actually work out your own methodology for delivering carbon credits. So there are several markets. The biggest one is the compliance market, which is the carbon credit market, which is about $261 billion at the moment. But the voluntary market is the one that excites me, because it means you can develop a project and you can go to a company and say to them, look, I can grow 5,000 hectares of hemp for you, and you can use that as part of your branding, your ESG, for want of a better word. So those are the markets that actually exist. There's a voluntary market and there's a compliance market. And then there are various bodies. Look, the carbon market is a bit like the Wild West at the moment. There's a lot of companies and organizations jockeying for position in it. There are organizations like Vera which are looking at the Amazon rainforest, the western forests of the USA, and looking at those. And that's reforestation, or the lack of deforestation, if you like, where they make a commitment not to actually cut down a forest.
I can't find that. Somebody's not on mute.
Gary, I think. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Thanks, Gary.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there are various mechanisms to actually deliver it, but don't be put off by that, because you can either take part in an official market like the European market, which is the biggest in terms of compliance, or you can take part in a voluntary market. And to me, the most exciting part of this is that you can actually go to a company like Microsoft or Google and do a deal with them to offset their carbon emissions.
There's a great question right here. Which registries have the best methodologies for registering carbon offsets associated with hemp growth?
This is being recorded, isn't it?
Yes.
So I've got to be careful what I say. There have been some criticisms of certain registries, especially those relating to lack of deforestation, because people have found that there is still deforestation going on in some of those territories. There is logging, there's clearance of land for beef, for soy, and therefore how valuable are those, or how valid are those carbon credits that you're actually purchasing from that body? There've been a lot of that. You don't have to listen to me. Go to the Guardian or look at some of the articles that have been written about these various mechanisms, and some of them have been found to be lacking. There's also the issue of double counting. Under the Paris Accord, countries have made commitments to limit their carbon emissions, and those carbon emissions within their country have been counted towards their national target, if you like. But those carbon emissions have also been sold to private companies or listed companies. So there's been a double counting of those carbon credits. So yes, look, what I would say is that the system is very much in its infancy. It's not a mature market, so therefore there are various things to look out for. But what I would look for, and what we're doing, we've set up a company called Carbon Futures, and what we're looking at is using blockchain to actually trace the carbon credits that we're generating, so that people can be sure that the carbon credit they're buying is actually genuine and hasn't been sold multiple times. Does that answer that question? I've kind of skipped around it a little bit, but because I don't want to mention any particular organizations, but what I would say is,
you go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Sorry, what I would say is that those are criteria that I would actually apply if I were a company looking to offset my carbon emissions.
Okay, so a good question. Here's another one, I guess, follow up to saying that Microsoft and Google would buy the related carbon offset. What do you need to do to register your carbon sequestration offset?
Well, look, for example, Microsoft is a good example, because that leads on to another question. But Microsoft are actually buying credits from what's called a direct air capture scheme in Iceland. And that scheme is actually involves machinery which actually sucks carbon from the air, pumps it underground using thermal energy, and turns it back into rock. Okay, which is it's a good idea. It's a good idea. However, that carbon is retailing for something between $1,000 and $1,200 per ton, which is actually very, very expensive. And it's only sequestering something like 4,000 tons of carbon per year. which you could actually sequester by growing 182 hectares of hemp. So, and it's cost something between 10 and $15 million. So when we look at things like X Prize is a case in point, because they say they want to look at technology which sequesters carbon from the atmosphere. Whereas I would maintain that hemp and other crops are a technology to sequester. And in a meeting I was at recently, someone said, this is direct air capture. There's no other way of putting it. We are taking carbon from the air, capturing it and sequestering it in the soil. So this is direct air capture. It doesn't have to be a machine that you have to build and maintain and run that actually sequesters carbon from the air. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Because
the
way I see it is that people are looking for, like, technology got us into this situation, and technology has to dig us out of it. Whereas the way I look at it is the earth can dig us out of this problem.
I like it. Have you come across any credible studies to quantify carbon sequestered in the soil from growing hemp?
That's an interesting subject, because we're actually doing we're looking at methodology at the moment. I'm working with some people. We have, as part of the AAHA, we actually have a regenerative farming group, and we've got some soil scientists working in that. And there's a woman called Dr. Mary Cole, who I think it would be a great idea to get her on here with you guys, because every time I talk to her, she blows my mind. It was thought that the way that carbon was sequestered in the soil was through microorganisms. But it's come to light that's not exactly true, because it's mycorrhizal fungi that are the major source of sequestering carbon in the soil. They actually, as a plant grows, it exudates carbon through its root system. That allows the development of a thing called glomalin. Okay, look it up. It was only identified in 1996. But glomalin is actually a kind of aqueous substance which consists of mycorrhizal fungi and water. And as we all know, the more moist a soil is, the more carbon it sequesters. That's just a fact. And the mycorrhizal fungi are responsible for sequestering the carbon and capturing it. Now, the reason that's important is because although bacteria in the soil do sequester carbon, they actually release most of it back into the air. It's something like 80-20. 20% is captured in the soil and 80% is actually released back into the air. With mycorrhizal fungi, it's the opposite. 80% is captured and maintained within the soil, and 20% is actually lost to the atmosphere. So this is something, I mean, it sounds weird to be sitting here talking about, getting excited about fungi in the soil, but I'm really excited about it because it means that, as well as the 22 tons of carbon that a hemp, a fiber hemp crop grown to its full height can sequester, we have another source. And if we can then show additionality, which under most of the schemes you have to show that what you've done is different to what was already there. It actually shows that we can actually add maybe 4 or 5-fold to the amount of carbon being sequestered by hemp. And as we all know, hemp is deep rooted and has a very, very fibrous root system. So therefore, the opportunities to sequester carbon in the soil is amazing. It's amazing. it could be 4 to 20 times what you can sequester in the biomass.
Okay. Do anybody have any questions? There were a lot of topics just brought up that I know some of your ears are buzzing. So if you do, don't hesitate to drop them in. I was just skimming through questions right here. Can you explain a little bit about how blockchain is being used, how you're specifically using it to track your carbon? Now, what is that?
Yeah, well, look. I mean, blockchain in essence, it's a distributed wallet. Every transaction you make is actually recorded independently. So therefore, it's an independently verifiable process. So that what blockchain can do is verify that what you're getting is what you paid for. Look, I mean, the way I came across this is we're working with a company here, which did some research in the drug industry, and between 5 and 8% of all drugs, and when I say drugs, I mean drugs for cancer and things like that in the medical system, are fake. Like what you're getting, your cancer drug, that you're getting before it gets to you may have been substituted for a fake drug. And that staggered me. It absolutely staggered me. So the idea of using blockchain is that when a credit is generated, you can guarantee that credit from that farm all the way to you that goes into your accounting system is actually verifiable.
Okay. I want to dive into the blockchain again sometime, because now
go ahead.
A little bit, but I don't want to on this call because it will be a rabbit hole for some of us. And so I want to stick to some of the carbon discussion, but yeah, I definitely would like to talk more about that. There's a lot of questions in here. Can you elaborate on the studies that the government plans to do on giving for carbon, since it's not looking like there will be a carbon tax?
Yeah, well, under a former government, we did have a carbon tax. And many governments in many countries have what they call a cap and trade, which means they're trying to meet their commitment under the Paris Accord, and the Paris Accord replaced the Kyoto Protocol. And the Paris Accord means that certain countries have to meet certain emissions criteria. They've made a commitment. They've signed it. They have to actually meet those commitments. So, in terms of meeting those commitments, the countries have to record and quantify the commitments the reductions they've made, without there being a carbon tax, if you like. So there's a cap and trade mechanism in force that allows countries to actually cap and trade carbon. So a country that actually has excess carbon or carbon emissions can buy carbon from another country that is actually sequestering more carbon than they're using.
Okay. Given the 80-20 relationship you mentioned, how damaging to carbon cycle would you say glyphosate is?
Glyphosate?
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, glyphosate is actually sold here in Australia. It's called Roundup, and it's used for killing weeds. And look, it's bloody good at it. It really is. But it's carcinogenic. It's detrimental to the soil. It kills microbes in the soil as well. So therefore, one of my neighbors was using glyphosate on their garden, and I actually spoke to their gardener to say, look, please stop using it. And they said, oh, why are you telling me that? And I said, I'm telling you that for you, not for the lawn. I'm saying that for you because I care about you, the gardener, because you're going to be the one that's going to suffer long-term ill effects from this. But yeah, we are backward. In a lot of ways, Australia is very backward as a country. we still rely on fossil fuels to a great degree. And although we're a small country in terms of population, if you added in our exports of coal and gas and all those things, we are actually a major emitter of greenhouse gases. Because we're actually selling our coal to countries like India and China, and some of the methodologies they have there for processing that into electricity, into power, are amongst the worst in the world as far as emissions go. So we are a pariah, and I don't mind saying that while we're recording, we're a pariah in terms of the environment. And, you know, when people think about Australia, they think about the barrier reef, they think about surfing, they think about all these things. And we actually are a major villain in terms of what we do in terms of emissions. And what actually happens here, without being too political about it, is that a lot of the areas where coal is mined and used and burnt for electricity, they're in rural areas. And in Australia, we have a great, you know, we say that Australia was built on the sheep's back. Anything that threatens the farmers and the rural areas is really a no-no here. Because then they say, the rural areas say, well, it's not up to you, your latte sipping, you know, Chardonnay drinking people who live in the city, you know, doing well, driving their BMW. We're not like you. We live in rural areas and we're the ones doing it tough. So anything that does it tough for rural areas is immediately seized upon as being anti-Australian. And if anyone's got any comments about Australia and our commitment to the environment, please give it to me, because I'm there, I'm with you.
Okay, well, I encourage any comments. There's lots more. There's a bunch that I'm going to go through real quick.
No, I really am. I'm ashamed. I'm actually true. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm originally from England, but I've lived in Australia since 1992. I have children here, grandchildren, and I'm actually ashamed of our record in terms of the environment. We have such a wonderful country, and we have a wonderful heritage here, and we're just basically we're using it like a dustbin.
Well, I have comments on ours as well, but I think that, you know, we have an opportunity right here to really make an impact and make change. Hemp is definitely in a position to come in and drastically impact.
Absolutely. And we've been doing some work with a major power company here. And every time I drive there and I come back, my car is covered in a film of dirt, basically soot. And they could be growing hemp there to absorb all the pollution that they're putting out in the local area. And although CO2 is a global, you know, gas, other pollutants are much more localized. So hemp can help to draw those heavy metals and things like that from the soil.
Okay, so there's a couple questions I'll go back to, but I want to address this one. We make reference to the report that you did in for the Australian government, and do use the 22 tons per hectare per harvest as a gross sequestration amount for CO2 removed. Are you saying that additional carbon can be stored in the soil over and above the 22 tons?
Yes, I am. And we don't know the full extent of it. There are companies now that are measuring carbon in soil from crops, all crops, not just hemp. But the problem is they only go down to a depth of about 30 centimeters. Then what they do is they compare that to satellite imagery from the last 10, 20, 30 years and work out the additionality of it. See, going back to looking at the power companies is a case in point, because if I'm a power company and I've got incredibly polluted land and I grow a crop and I sequester carbon from it, I clean up my own mess, for want of a better word, I can actually get carbon credits for that. But if I'm a farmer who's been farming organically 50 years and I grow a crop which is organic, I can't get anything because I'm not showing additionality. So it's a conundrum, really.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious how that's going to change. You know, what do you project as far as that changing? And that's a topic that comes up quite a bit, is especially all these that have been in regenerative practices for so long.
Look,
and how far off are we from having a baseline that then can be used?
That's a good question. Here in Australia, I'm not optimistic about it because
Okay.
I see additionality as the key. And if you've got a crop, if you're growing cotton, or if you're growing sugarcane here, which we've got lots of sugarcane being grown, especially in Queensland, and you can grow hemp instead, and you can show additionality, then that's something which is measurable and verifiable. But I'm not optimistic about the whole system being changed in the short term.
Do you have any recommendations for papers or let's see, papers or presentations, guided questions that we could add for reading regarding the hemp and carbon sequestration?
Look, there is somebody from Cambridge University actually was in the news recently, published some information about carbon sequestration from hemp, but I can't find the actual paper it came from. So no, I mean, look, the fact that my papers, and you can pick it up from our website, hempalliance.org.au, because there's a fuller version of it there. The fact that my paper comes up after 10 years suggests that there's not enough work being done in this area. And that was something that I did off my own bat because I realized there was an opportunity with the government to actually have hemp counted as far as a carbon sequestration mechanism is concerned. So there are papers, yes, out there, and you can do your own Google search and you'll find them. I can't point to any papers in particular that would give you there. Although look, there's places you can go. There's carboncredits.com where you can look at general information on the carbon market and see how you think that your scheme might fit in with that. That explains quite clearly the difference between carbon credits and offsets and the different markets that are available and the volume of the market, because a lot of people that are not aware of how big this market is would be shocked by how big the market is. As I said, the compliance market is $261 billion a year. And the voluntary market is $1 billion and rising. So when you look at that there's a good reason for people to look at it and think, well, this is really interesting from a fiscal point of view. It's like a Bitcoin in 2010. And when you also think about the fact that a lot of companies, as I said, I worked in marketing before, the biggest advertising organization in the world is WPP, and they've made a commitment to be carbon neutral. And they haven't said how they're going to do it, but they've made a commitment to be carbon neutral. So they're using that as part of their branding exercise. And therefore, there's an opportunity there. And carbon is only going to go up in price. I mean, ACCUs, which is the Australian Carbon Credit Units, were trading at something like $20 a ton about 6 months ago. They're now $60 a ton.
I just read a comment here that, thank you very much, Mark, that, yeah, don't get the Americans on this call started. If Australia is a villain, then we're flat murdering Mother Nature.
Okay. Well, look,
we have a lot of work to do also. So
look, we all do, but let's not let perfect get in the way of good.
Right. Right.
Let's do something. Let's do something good before we become perfect. That's the thing. I mean, self-flagellation is one thing, but doing something good is, to me, is another thing. And if we can do something good for the environment, then that's actually a good thing, you know.
Absolutely.
And I'm not talking about beating yourself up because you put a beer bottle in your dustbin instead of in the recycling, you know. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about doing something good for the environment, because we all have to live here, you know. It's important. And I think George Bernard Shaw said, you know, if we live for 300 years, we'd be much more careful about what we did. We just don't live long enough.
Yes. Okay. So there's two questions that come up a lot in our group. And I think we kind of addressed them before, that there was a big thank you for all of the information that you've put out, and was questioning or wondering if there are specific methodologies approved by Vera, GS, ACR, and other registries for hemp. Now, how do we know what those methodologies are, or find those specific methodologies?
Sorry, I missed that. Can you say that again? Because there was a kind of...
My phone rang at the same time.
My phone going. Go on, go ahead.
This is really funny. My team put together a bloopers video of all the times that that's happened, so it'll be entertaining. But says, I'd still love to have someone point out the specific methodologies approved by Vera, GS, ACR, and other registries for growing hemp.
Yeah, look, there is somebody in Australia at the moment who is doing a methodology for Vera. Okay. So we call it Vera, which is a lady's name. But anyway, there's somebody that's doing that. I tend to think, to me, that the biggest opportunity is to do something in the voluntary market, where you go to a company. As I said, I've been involved in marketing for 30 years. I know the difference that it makes to a company to be, have good ESG standards. So therefore, I think going to a company and saying to a company, look, we can grow 50,000 hectares of hemp for you. Okay, you can take the carbon credits, but you can also talk about what you're doing, especially if you're doing it in an area, say you were doing it in India, where you're also helping a local community to thrive through growing hemp. I mean, if you work on the basis that carbon will be trading at something like $100 a ton.
Yeah.
Okay. So somebody growing hemp can immediately, on a hectare, and this could be one farmer growing 1 hectare, they've got the potential of $4,400 income.
So I want to speak to that really quick, because there's a question here with respect to the 22 hectares, 22 tons per hectare. How is the hemp crop being processed to actually sequester the carbon and not just released?
Okay, that's a good question, because what we're looking at is capturing carbon in terms of turning into mostly hempcrete.
Finished good.
Yeah. Now, hempcrete also, as it undergoes a process of carbonization, continues to absorb CO2. And a square meter of hempcrete, a cubic meter of hempcrete, absorbs something like 186 kilos of hemp of CO2, mostly in the first 2 years, as it undergoes carbonization. So looking at turning into something like that is I mean, if you're going to cut it down and burn it, of course, it's a waste of time. But if you turn it into a shirt like this, or into hempcrete, then it's something which you've locked away forever.
Okay, so here's another question talking about end products. And I'm not sure that I understand this completely, but what is the typical metric for carbon sequestration level in hemp byproducts, such as hempcrete or textiles? That's still by the ton, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I don't have the actual figures, but if you go to a site called hempmasonry.com.au, they'll have figures there. They're one of our corporate members. they'll have figures on that of the amount it sequesters. So by cutting it down, and when I say 22 tons is for a hemp fiber and herd crop. So something that grows to 3-4 meters. And in the US now, I've seen it growing 6-7 meters. So the numbers could be even bigger. But if you cut it down, turn it into hempcrete, then you've actually locked that carbon up for the foreseeable future.
So it's not additional. There was a question here that end product is not sequestering additional carbon. That's just locking that carbon.
No, hempcrete does. It continues to sequester carbon throughout its life.
And of course, I'm interested in all of that end data. Your opinion, do you see it feasible for the top 3 register approving carbon credits for hemp biomass infused into durable goods as a replacement to an existing material? Do you see it feasible for the top 3 register approving carbon credits for hemp biomass infused into durable goods? Eric, I'm not sure if I understand this question.
Okay, well, look, can I have a stab at it? I do definitely see it as feasible that hemp should be up there with all the other methodologies that sequester carbon. There's been a lot of work done on mangroves recently because they actually sequester quite a lot of carbon too, as well as stop erosion of the soil. So there's a lot of other benefits to things like that. Seaweed as well is another one which has actually been investigated, and I think X Prize has actually given some funding to a seaweed project. And of course, with the seaweed, you have the on benefit that if you feed seaweed to cows, you stop the methane exhalations through their breath, basically. So seaweed can be used in. There's always another benefit to it. So yes, I do see hemp should be there, but it's a question of us developing the methodologies and verifying the methodologies. But one of the things we have to do is we have to look at the inputs into hemp as well, because if you look at a hemp farm, it's agriculture itself, I think, actually contributes about 30% of the global emissions. So it's not a free ride. So if you actually look at agriculture itself, you've got to look at the inputs into agriculture and count them and subtract them from the ledger on the other side. Okay, but definitely. I mean, look, I'm a hemp evangelist, so naturally I see it that way. And in fact, one of the problems with hemp is the fact that it can do so much, and it sounds like bullshit when you say, well, we're looking for a replacement batteries. Well, hemp can do that. Well, we're looking at replacement for this. Hemp can do that. Hemp could do that. Hemp could do that. Ethanol, hemp. It sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about collecting the data, can you speak a little bit about how you're actually collecting that data and tracking it?
Well, look, I mean, if you have a hemp crop,
blockchain, but from there or getting it to
sure. Look, if you have a hemp crop, I mean, in my paper, what I looked at was the amount of lignin in the crop. Then you could work out the amount of carbon that's embodied in that. So it's a question of just weights and measures as well. And then the same goes for carbon in the soil. You look at actually how you measure that in the soil and how many data points you have in a field to measure that, and then how you calibrate that and extrapolate that to a wider area, because obviously there are costs involved in measuring carbon as well. And measuring carbon in the soil is not cheap.
Right. There's another lot of discussion about who is allowed to actually make those calculations. Who's certified to do that, and how do people find out who is certified to?
Right. Well, look, that's a good question. If you do go to someone like Vera and you submit a methodology and you you adhere to their practices, then they can certify you. But that doesn't stop anybody from actually going to the voluntary market and having a scientific methodology to verify the amounts in terms of the amount of carbon that's being sequestered, and submitting that under a voluntary scheme. It's a bit like, here we have the Heart Foundation, which gives a tick to companies that actually meet their criteria, but the Heart Foundation is actually owned by a group of food companies.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying there? It's a question of, it could be the Global Hemp Association giving its tick of approval to a carbon project.
Okay.
As I said, it's early days. If you look at the old, I can't remember who came up with the thing about innovators, early adopters, etc., etc. We're at the really earliest stage of this. We really are. So it's up to, it's like, the Federal Reserve is not owned by the government.
Right. Sure.
It's a company. So, it's up to people to throw their hat in the ring and be there to verify these things. But there's certainly no monopoly on this. I mean, VERA is not it's not mandated by the UN or something like that. They're a private concern.
I have another question about which registries you use.
Which do I use?
Yes.
Oh, well, look, I mean, the easiest one for us to use is the Australian Carbon Credit Units, ACCUs.
Gotcha. I hope that's question.
Yeah. But we're also not averse to using the voluntary market too, which can actually deliver, like VERA, for example, they have schemes in place in Africa, in the rainforest in Brazil, whereby they're looking at credits between something like between $20 and $40 per ton, depending on what those schemes are. But there are schemes in the voluntary market where you're looking at $150 a ton. So to me, you've got to look at all the opportunities.
Okay, so I hope that answered your question, Steve. But just to be clear, to follow up on an earlier question, if you monetize the carbon credit at the farm level, do you get to monetize the credit at the byproduct level? I think you kind of touched on that double dipping earlier on, as well as.
So you get to monetize it at the. Well, no, you can't sell something twice.
Right.
No, so it's sold at one level, yes, except in the case of hempcrete, because you could actually argue that growing the hemp and the herd, which is used in hempcrete, has a certain amount of sequestration attached to it, $22 tons per hectare. If you can then actually have additional sequestration over 10 years, 100 years, or whatever, you can then look at an additional credit. But no one's actually done that yet, as far as I know.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments? There's lots that I'm skimming through, but if anybody wants to jump in and say anything or chime in, we have about 10, 15 minutes left on the call, but I want to make sure I open it up. There's a lot of comments in here. George, I see you have one. Not knowing why CDM is used and all major companies are required by regulation to use UNFCCC approved carbon credit offset registry. I'm not sure if that's probably just a comment. George, go ahead if you want to make that comment or add to it. You're on, not on mute. You're welcome to.
Yeah, no, sorry. I'm asking which UNFCCC clean development mechanism you're using for making these claims. And the voluntary market is regulated in all countries as well as compliance markets under the Dodd-Frank Act here in the US. So it's also regulated the same way in Australia. So you have to use a UN FCCC VERA gold standard or the UN registry to place your carbon offset projects on. So I'm just asking those questions because if you're making believe out here on some registry that's off in the middle of nowhere and you made it up, the people that buy those offsets are going to get hammered by the regulators. We're SEC regulated. We actually trade these on an SEC regulated marketplace. So
yeah, look, I mean, there are compliance markets and voluntary markets.
I'm talking about you're trying to make a difference of compliance. Compliance is a cap and trade market that's regulated on a state level here or a regional level in the US. Nationally, they're regulated by the SEC. The SEC says all offsets, period, all offsets are regulated by us in Dodd-Frank. Doesn't matter if it's voluntary, doesn't matter if it's compliance, it's just regulated.
Where are those certified then? Where do they go to regulate those? What's that miscommunication or that missing link?
There is no missing link. The SEC was very clear in April that they are following the UNFCCC guidelines, as well as the EU, as well as the G8 and the G20, that they are relying on all their financial regulators, and they're all pointing to the UN, right? And so you go to the UN, you look up certified carbon offset registries by the UN, and you will come up with 3 of them right now. And there are more in application, but it's VERA, gold standard, and the UN registry. The UN registry only does developing countries or underdeveloped countries. The other 2 are the 2 primaries for developed countries in these types of projects. We've got a ton of projects going right now that are agricultural that the CDM took $250,000 to get developed with VERA in almost 26 months.
None of those are for trading.
Nope, those are just carbon offsets.
Just registering carbon offsets, not selling them.
Not selling them at all. And then they've got to be registered with the SEC when you go to apply them. Otherwise, it's considered a private placement, and you better have an SEC attorney doing that private placement. So if I were to sell them to you and not be regulated underneath the SEC, that sale would be invalid and both of us would get fined.
Well, that is definitely not happening today in the United States. Regardless of what they've said needs to happen, that's not the way the market is trading.
Right.
Right now, they're ready. So we're part of the UNFCCC. We do the CNN. We're a registered company with them as compliance for measurement. So the SEC is actually getting ready to make all of this industry specific this first quarter of this year. They started in April of last year. Dodd-Frank clearly identified it in 2010, and the SEC has made several investor statements since then on offsets and registries and compliance markets, right? And they consider any offset a compliance market. When people start talking regulated versus non-regulated, regulated is a cap and trade. It's a specific set of rules in a specific market. Voluntary, wide open to SEC control. And they're in the process of doing that right now. The bear traps that they set out in November/December of last year, there are people going to be going to jail for trading in offsets. And what they did, instead of having the companies report to PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment here in the US, they flipped it on its head and said, okay, we're going to give you guys a year, 2022, and your first reporting year is going to be 2023. Because a lot of companies were pushing back because ISO is the backbone of the audit and it requires a lot of data to determine.
There's somewhere that someone could put a link to some further information about this. It sounds exceedingly important and interesting. And I actually like to read about it so I don't go to jail.
Well, I think there's lots of us, right? We're all speaking about this. I saw that there's some other comments. Eric made a comment, VM0021 and VM0042. What are those referring to, Eric?
CDMs.
Those are Vera methodologies for sequestering carbon in soil and improved agricultural land management. Those are the methodologies they use to validate carbon in soil.
Thank you.
One of those, the one I mentioned earlier, I guess there's two of them that would work both for hemp.
Right.
Yes, actually, the engagements I've had is they don't have anything for hemp because they've never modeled hemp. So what they tell me is that you use a surrogate crop, corn, wheat, soy, whatever, as a placement or supplant the hemp and use that modeling as a baseline.
Those are the Indigo AG methodologies. Indigo AG put them on Vera.
I believe they worked with Indigo AG. Yep.
Jason said there are none for biomass. Is that, I would assume that you just use those sister crops or other crops?
Well, actually, there's some Vera methodologies for like greenhouse gas capture and plastic materials. So you can look up their methodologies, but they do have some for product level that comes through Vera.
Jason, what do you mean by there are no methodologies on Vera for biomass? I thought there were a number of them for using biomass to drive cement factories and energy production and other kinds of things using biomass as an energy feedstock.
Are there any other comments? Has anybody else anything? James, go ahead.
This is George. I just put a link in the chat to an article that I was a co-author on the SEC stuff, which appeared in the Counselors of Real Estate. It's a peer-reviewed journal internationally, and it applies internationally.
Yeah. Thank you, George.
And
Yeah,
so
thank you.
The methodologies you just mentioned for driving cement plants using biomass, things of that nature, that's actually under a UNFCCC CDM called fuel switching. So it allows you to move from a fossil fuel to biomass to renewables. There's a whole bunch of things in there, and that cascades across 10 other CDMs. So when you look at those, the Vera ones are very important. Don't get me wrong, Vera does a great job, but the CDMs are the base of that, and the UN is moving to technology versus nature-based. That's the big movement that they're coming out with now, because nature-based is at risk with climate change, ocean rise, and others.
There's a question here. Is that for the biomass or the carbon credit below ground as well as above ground? Above ground growth versus below ground growth, the credits?
Well, all right, let's take a forestry project, right? You're doing afforestation, in other words, reforesting. So when you calculate in the carbon storage, you're calculating in the above ground piece, and the below ground piece is a secondary measurement because the tree has as many roots as it does branches, if not more. So most of the time when you're taking that measurement, depending on which CDM and which tool you're using, you can calculate both at once or you calculate them individually.
Okay. Any other questions? James, do you have anything you want to add?
No, look, this is really fascinating. I've not faced jail recently, but I'm sure I will. And, in keeping with the Australian tradition, because we are a country of criminals, that's very, very interesting to learn about that. I would like to know how far reaching that legislation is in other markets. When somebody mentions Vera, I mean, look, the Amazon rainforest is actually a net emitter now of carbon rather than a sequester of carbon. So I don't see how Vera carbon credits are still being generated and bought up by airlines, etc. So that's another question. I don't want to cast aspersions on Vera, for example, but But yeah, the thing I'd like to finish on though is what the opportunity here is that companies are now being valued much more on intangible assets rather than tangible assets. So in terms of their brands, their brand value is their brand reputation. And one of the things that I see as an opportunity here is for the hemp industry to approach, and which is what we're doing, to approach companies and say to them, look, we can do something for you which is very, very good. We can grow you an organic crop. We can turn it into hempcrete, and we can actually show you how to maximize the benefit to you, the return to your brand value. That's one of the most exciting things I see about this. Microsoft is doing it at the moment, as I said, with their carbon capture and storage scheme in Iceland. But I see that hemp has a greater role to play in that kind of scenario. So that companies can be saying, like, in their foyer, they have a picture of a hemp crop, and people say, what's that? They go, that's our hemp crop we're growing in Malawi, for example, or Vanuatu, or whatever. We're growing that hemp crop because we're helping the people there to actually benefit from what we're doing in terms, and we're offsetting our carbon at the same time. To me, that's one of the most exciting things I see. And the legislation, I'm really interested in to learn more about that, as George has been speaking about. That's fascinating to me.
Another great question by Tim right here. Carbon stored in GMO pesticide. Hold on, I lost it. Glyphosate.
Glyphosate, yeah. Call it Roundup. We're very simple.
As an
we're
organic.
very simple people here. We just don't call it glyphosate. Call it Roundup, mate. It's Roundup.
So the question is, shouldn't the carbon credit be a function of the micro fungal and 80-20 ratio you mentioned?
Well, yes, but I mean, you have to quantify that. I mean, on a crop by crop basis, because if you're growing for one purpose, you'll get a different root system than you will if you're growing for another purpose. If you're growing for food, then you'll have a different root system, and therefore a different mycorrhizal fungi system than you would if you're growing for fiber.
Tim, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute. I don't know, your sound's not working it. Let's see.
Can I make a request?
Yeah.
Mandi, could you copy the chat?
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll be.
And email it to us.
Yep.
So there's a lot of really fascinating stuff there.
Yes, there's lots of great documents. Tim, I'm not sure what's going on. I've got like this funny arrow in your screen. I can't hear you though. Nope, I don't have anything. I'm going to try getting out, maybe log out and log back in, because I'd love to have you join the conversation. Yes, so this will be transcribed and edited. I'll make sure that all of the notes and the files, there are a lot of documents you guys shared. I really, really appreciate that. I also really want to encourage you guys to connect, share your contact information, get in touch with each other. This is a perfect opportunity to take this conversation elsewhere. We also host this same meeting the first, what's today, Tuesday of every month. Okay, so every month we have a carbon meeting about this discussion. So I really encourage you guys to come back and have this conversation again. And then also this conversation really sums up the value to why we are hosting or putting together these seed trials or collaborating on these seed trials, because it is the beginning step of this collection of data that we're all talking about, and being able to validate some of this stuff on a much larger scale. There's been a lot of research done on pockets and within states and different verticals, but really being able to pull the verified genetics and different varieties together on a bigger scale is our goal. And so I really encourage you guys to get involved. And then also supporting us with membership. There's sponsor opportunities as companies to get in front of And then one last thing that I want to mention, I guess two, is shout out to Westtown Bank. They've been fabulous to us and fabulous as sponsors. So I want to be sure I throw them a plug. And then also GHA is partnering with NOCO this year to sponsor the awards banquet. And our goal is to really bring the emphasis of these industrial applications into the conversation. And so I'd really love your support and love to have you guys there. There will be some awards that are going to be given out. I'll be sharing.
You brought two friends, and you can leave. Come back.
Oh, I think we're back. Okay. I don't know. Oh, Tim, are you back on? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I am. Apologize for that.
No worries. I'd love for you to chime back in. I was just kind of giving a little commercial there. But you go ahead, sir.
Yeah, the roundup question is basically, I'm curious about the math. If someone is producing hemp in an organic fashion using that 80-20 metric that you referred to, it seems like that farmer is going to be accumulating carbon in the soil way faster than the farmer that's farming using Roundup and glyphosate sprayed fields. So it seems like we should give credit for folks that do it in the right way, if you will, or in a manner that accumulates it faster. That's my question. Does the math and the credit system account for that, or does it treat both of those farmers the same?
Look, I mean, in this market and the markets that I've been involved in, it's a question of additionality. So are you doing something which has changed the practices from what went before? So yes, it is logical that if somebody has been using good practices, you should be rewarding them. But it doesn't work that way in reality. Because if you've got some really derelict land and you do something good to it, you'll actually get more credit than you do if you've got land that's actually always been managed in a very, very ethical and responsible way. And that's it's an anomaly to me, because everything has to be additional. It's additional carbon in the soil. It's additional. Now, if you're growing a crop and you cut the crop, you harvest the crop, turn it into something, sequester the carbon, then there's no question that that's additional, because you grow it 90 days, 120 days, you've got additional carbon that wasn't there before. But in soil, the question of additionality has to be kind of measured and proven. Does that answer your question, or does that make it more confusing?
Thank you for the answer. It doesn't make me feel real.
I don't feel good about it either.
And it begs a lot more questions. I mean, if you're going to farm, right now farmers get credit for the yield, a bushel of corn. Do you raise the corn using a bunch of anhydrous ammonia and fossil fuel, or do you raise the corn and do you not kill microbes, not have your product drift onto the neighbors? And the willy-nilly system just doesn't seem to connect the dots and say this is a good practice or a bad practice. And you just laid out there that you can basically sequester an ass load more carbon if you do it in this manner. And it sounds like if you've been farming for 20 years with pesticides and you decide not to for a year, you get a lot more credit. And that it's going to take a while for that Roundup soaked field to start storing carbon again. It's an antibiotic.
Yeah, look, I agree with you. It seems really crazy that that's the way it works.
However, that's the people that came up with the system, please.
Yeah, look, I mean, and we do talk to them. But what I would say is that in terms of what you do, and this is why the voluntary market is actually quite a key to this, is that you can then go to a company and one company can say, well, for example, British Airways, they've offset all of their flights. They can offset your flight with rainforest credits, which are worth something. Again, I'm treading very carefully here. But if you go to a company, you can say to them, look, I'm not giving you some bullshit credit here. I'm giving you the best of the best. This is organic, it's hemp, it's good for the environment. We're doing it in a country or an island where people have a hard time, and 1 hectare of hemp can put those people's kids through school for their, for their whole education. When you can use those things and look at those things they can do and they can leverage, then that's, to me, is a more powerful argument, rather than saying, I used to be a farmer that used Roundup and I'm not doing it anymore, and, reward me. You've got to look at the value and the, authenticity of those credits that you're generating. That, to me, is key to everything.
I think that, bringing up a good point, being able to validate those, right? So that we can. And I think that still is where, a lot of the question comes down, and there's so much, I guess, controversy and what is that method and what is the right method and where does that credit go? And so I appreciate these conversations, and I appreciate you guys, being able to, or I hope we can provide a place where you're able to address questions and concerns so that we can get to the bottom of, what is right. And that's really the goal here, is coming together to say, this is what's working and this is what isn't working. And this is what helps our farmers most and, generates the most revenue for everybody involved. So absolutely.
I appreciate your passion. I really do. Because unless people speak out about these things and call it for what it is, then nothing will ever change.
Right.
Companies will go on buying, credits and make themselves feel good about offsetting their first class flight with some credits which generate from a dubious source. And they'll say, well, I've done my bit. And then you say, well, have you really done your bit? Because what you've bought is actually of dubious value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that the method will develop for us to determine with sensors the amount of carbon that's actually sequestered in the soil. And so if you want to kill your soil and not benefit from the sequestered carbon, that will be your choice. It sounds like the private market, once again, effectively has a more efficient system, and some of the regulatory government bodies are not able to come up with quite the same system. But yeah, the fact that we call things organic that aren't organic, we have consumers that buy products that are not what they think they are, is a problem. And that sounded like another instance of that. So for sure, the private market sounds like the way to spend some time. And thank you much for all the work you're doing. I really appreciate it. Don't mean to be so.
Look, there's definitely a bandwagon here. There's a bandwagon, there's, people are saying, if you look at the hype that goes on with various sites you go to that actually sell and generate carbon credits, they mention Bitcoin every other paragraph. Every other paragraph is Bitcoin. This is the next Bitcoin. It's the next Bitcoin. It's the next thing. It's the next thing. So get on board now. So there's definitely a bandwagon there. And as with all bandwagons, there's people who get on board that are not as clean and transparent as they could be.
Absolutely. Mark, I saw your mic came off. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in and chime in real quick. We're at about 15 after. No. Okay. Well, you guys, I want to say thank you very, very much. This was a great discussion. I really, really appreciate everything that you guys have added in. I encourage you to come back. I encourage you to please connect with us. We've got lots of projects coming up. And then also, if I have not had you on as a guest, or if you have somebody specific you're trying to connect with, let me know. I'd love to invite them up as a guest. I'd love to dive in. This is how we bring people together and really breed conversation, highlighting people that are doing it right. So please, I open this up. And then also any feedback you have. What can we do to better support you? What type of things are you looking to hear or learn? What type of connections, or, what does the message look like that you guys are really trying to get out that we could potentially help you with? So we encourage that. Reach out to any of us. I saw Michelle was on here earlier today also. So please reach out to Michelle or Kayla or Joanne or myself anytime. James, any closing remarks before we say goodbye to everybody? And thank you.
Oh, no, look, this has been a pleasure. I've learned a lot as well as said a lot. And I think one of the most important things we've got to do in this whole industry, which has been lacking, is to share. We have to share what we know, because it's big enough for everybody to benefit. And certainly in my experience working in the hemp industry, there's been a lot of jealousy and factioning and silos and things like that. And I think that has to stop. We've got to get out there and share what we know and have debates, healthy debates, to push the industry forward rather than our own agenda.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, you're speaking my language. Like I said, that's part of our mission, is really getting this out there. So I thank you guys. Thank you to our members. You guys, we cannot do it. We cannot continue to grow without your support. And we have big plans this year for 2022. And so we're here to support you and stand behind all of you. Again, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very, very much for everything. We'll see you guys next time.
Fantastic.
Thanks, guys. James, thank you again very much for your time.
Okay.
Much appreciated.
Bye.
Yep. A reminder, this will be recorded and shared in a couple of days on our YouTube channel and Hemp Hallway. Log on to hemphallway.com and you'll get the transcribed notes also. And then to find membership, please log in. Membership or sponsors, or I saw Kayla had shared our link for our seed trials. So we'll be sure everybody gets those as well. Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Hey, everybody. See ya.
Thanks, Joanne.
Bye.
Thanks, Kayla. See you guys.
See ya.
Hi, John. See you.